from then on, the Boxers came into the city, and the whole thing was completely out of control because the Boxers actually would go into different houses and loot. And they wouldn't just loot, obviously they would loot the Christian churches or the so-called the officials who were more on the, probably more on the pro-Western side. Li Hongzhang wasn't in Beijing at the time, but he would be some, like the modernizing officials, they would loot them. But they would also loot, for example, one of the close allies of Gang Yi and Zhuang Qing was a guy called Xu Tong. Xu Tong was the most educated in the Chinese classics of all people in the Qing Dynasty. But this is his level of understanding of the Western world. The names for Spain and Portugal, because of the translation, has the word ya at the end, which means tooth. Okay? And he would say something like, how can two countries who are just teeth, be a country? So this is his level of understanding but he's one of the most learned scholars. Even his home was looted. So it's kind of like the Cultural Revolution. His home was looted. One of the best, the best Manchurian buddies of Duan and Zhuang, his whole family got killed by the Boxers. So you can think that whole city was, I guess, especially probably very relevant to today. It's when something really goes into chaos, it could really go into chaos.
When you said that the Boxers had gone into Beijing,
yep.
How many approximately?
100,000. 100,000, yep.
And what was the size of Beijing at the time?
You could say it's like within the second ring of Beijing now. Yeah. So Beijing now has 5 rings. So, but it was within 2 rings. And so at the same time when they were coming in, they would kill. For example, the one I mentioned, one family got completely got massacred because they found matches in their home. Another guy it was searched, and then there was a pencil and foreign paper. I guess this would be a foreign paper. He was killed on the spot. So it's like anarchy. And all the diplomats were basically trapped in their own embassies. Okay? And then think about it. They're killing, they're looting Xu Tong's home. So we're not talking about just a low-level person. They're killing, at the end of the day, at the last tally, they killed eventually Boxers. Obviously, it's very difficult to tell. But about 20,000 Chinese and about 200 foreigners. And most of the foreigners, in Shanxi or in Zhili, a lot of them are missionary families, including kids and women. So at that point in time, the foreigners actually started to assemble a group of soldiers to defend the embassies. Okay, so in Chinese, this episode is called 八国联军, which is the 8-country alliance invasion of China. But from the foreign perspective, it's basically organizing armed forces to defend the embassies or to save the diplomats in the embassy. And so we talk about June. So the relationship is getting very, very tight. And then also one thing is the Qing government had been asking the foreigners to leave, but for one reason or another they haven't. And so around the same day, the Empress Dowager actually got, sorry, a lot of names, but it's okay. Just have to remember this one side. Dong Fuxiang. Dong Fuxiang was actually a Taiping rebellion general that then defected to the Qing side, and he had an army from Gansu. They're called the Gan army, and so they're one of the worst equipped, one of the worst trained, one of the least disciplined. But then he was very, very, very loyal to the Empress Dowager, and that's why the Empress Dowager got him to come over. And then, from me, circumstantially, it's basically Empress Dowager did not trust Duan and Zhuang, so she tried to get another set of armed forces. So you can think of it, it's not just a very simple foreigners against the Qing. It's not as simple as the foreigners against the Boxers. It's pretty much within the Qing dynasty. Why would she get someone who's absolutely irrelevant out to be in Beijing? Very likely is to balance the armed forces within Beijing. But when he came, the problem with Dong is this. Because Dong Fuxiang, the problem with him is because he's from Taiping Rebellion. Taiping Rebellion, most of the soldiers are actually from Ge Lao Hui. Ge Lao Hui is another kind of triad organization that's based on the White Lotus superstition that is very similar to the Boxer Rebellion. Actually, Falun Gong is the same thing too. It's always ignorance plus hunger leads to mass organized disruption based on religion and superstition. Chinese history has always been like this, all the way from like 3,000 years ago to today. And so he was very sympathetic with the Boxers. So now you've got the whole Beijing city very sympathetic with the Boxers. And then one of these, and then there was a Japanese diplomat that got killed, and his entrails got ripped out, and he was decapitated. One of the Japanese he was like an official inside the embassy, so it started killing foreign diplomats, and that's a big no-no, right? And then as we go in, there was a Kettler was actually very much against obviously he was like the most militant of all the ambassadors. So he would like shoot at random people from his window. And then because most of the Beijing at the time, because if you didn't wear red, a boxer would always wear red. If you didn't wear red, that means you're not a boxer, and then you get killed. So everybody wore red. And so one time there was like 2 adults and a kid went by the German embassy. Kettler hit the 2 adults. They ran away. The son was left, and there was a 12-year-old boy, and Kettler would have him executed the next day. And so because of that night, the Boxers went to the German embassy, right next to the Austro-Hungarian embassy. And then because it was dark, I think the machine gun was pointing a bit higher. So they were shooting. And as they shot, it was like no one got hurt. And so the whole legend that the Boxer can go against the foreign artillery then was vindicated. And so that's one episode. And then
so they had been wearing red. That's why you shot.
Yeah. So because if you don't wear if you were a Beijing resident, if you didn't wear red, the Boxers will kill you. If you did wear red, then a Kettler would kill you. Yeah. So it was a pretty bad state at the time.
Oh, but within the Boxer pro-Boxers, so that they can end Boxers, they must have had certain leaders as well.
Well, most of them are like poorly educated, like it's called Da Shi Xiong, or like grandmaster, something like that.
But you're saying that things get completely out of control. I mean, was that really sort of the intention when they came into Beijing, to do whatever you want to do?
Yeah, it's like well, I mean, like if you're hungry and then you go to Beijing and you see like big mansion with a lot of stuff, and you just go crazy, right? Yeah, they're just like I was like completely out of control.
But there was no leader per se.
No leader per se. Yeah. No leader per se. And it, like just circumstantially, if like Xu's home was, it's a bit like Cultural Revolution. So it's like there would be a leader, but then it's basically chaos, right? Yeah. It's basically chaos. There's nothing systematic.
It's interesting to think of, obviously, in the context of what's happening now in Hong Kong as well. Yep. Not that this is in any way like
we're nowhere nearly close. I hope, like, thank God.
No,
right?
Nothing like that at all. But at the same time, you have a movement. I don't like to be called a revolution, but a movement that is effectively leaderless.
Yep.
And you're starting to see how that has
evolved. Like
an
organism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. I don't know if you would. I mean, I guess you had that with Occupy, New York.
Yeah.
But typically, I think that in the West, you would probably have a Martin Luther King. You would have somebody who was at the forefront of
walking the march. Yeah.
And
so
I don't know if that's some collectivist Chinese style of rebellion or what. I don't know, but it's
difficult to tell. Yeah.
But someone must have made a decision that let's go into Beijing. I mean, someone must have told them that this is. Yeah, no,
they would this guy called Zhang Chengde or something like that. They would go in. They go in, but then obviously they would have liaisons with Prince Duan. And so as we progressed, the situation in Beijing. What's really interesting is at the same time, when the Emperor Dowager is supposed to be supportive and letting them coming in and having Dong Fuxiang and the army Gan to come in and having Prince Duan to be the foreign minister, at the same time, she asked Li Hongzhang. Remember, Li Hongzhang was all the modernization was done by him. She asked Li Hongzhang to come to Beijing. Now, Li Hongzhang, after being disgraced in the Sino-Japanese War, the Empress Dowager kind of kept him alive by having him to be the governor of Guangdong and Guangxi. so like southern China. And so when she asked him to come to Beijing, he was like, no way, right? And at the same time, because Beijing was going in such a bad place, now we have one of the main characters of Chinese history coming up, Sun Yat-sen. We'll come back to him and talk more about how he rose. But basically, everybody knew that he was against the Qing government. He's supposed to overthrow, he was a revolutionary. The governor of Hong Kong at the time, Blake, actually tried to organize a meeting between Li Hongzhang and Sun Yat-sen in Hong Kong. But then, if you remember, a few times back, in the Taiping Rebellion, Li Hongzhang actually killed some of the people who surrendered to him in the Taiping Rebellion. And so Sun Yat-sen was scared that Li Hongzhang would do that again. So he left. If he didn't leave, they were actually negotiating about, because Beijing is in such shambles, that Guangdong and Guangxi would be independent, an independent state. If that had happened, it would be actually very interesting. Yeah. But at the same time, within the court, there was a rumor that came. It's supposed to be from the North China Herald. There was an editorial piece that said that someone told Ronglu, who then brought it up in the government, in the top official meeting, that the foreigners are thinking about disposing disposing the Empress Dowager and having Guangxu to come back. And so from then on, according to history, the Empress Dowager is like, if we fight, we'll die. If we don't fight, we'll die. So let's just fight anyway. But at the same time, what's interesting about this is everything was happening at the same time. The foreigners actually were attacking the port of Tianjin, and then there were 2,000 soldiers led by a veteran called Seymour, and he was actually trapped between Tianjin and the coast until he was actually saved until the end of July. So actually at that point in time, the pro-war side were actually very happy because they were like, see, we have to do it anyway because we've got the support of the people, and see, the foreigners are not that good because look at Seymour is actually stuck. Obviously, Seymour was actually ill prepared. So the foreigners were actually attacking the port and the cannons at the port. The only country that did not fire was America. Because America's perspective was this: we are not actually fighting a war against the Chinese government. We're helping the Chinese government to put down this rebellion. Okay, so we talk about mid-June, and then so obviously it's easy, and then so they got the cannon, they went in, and they were supposed, and then going to drag into the. They were heading towards Tianjin. And as they were heading towards Tianjin, Kettler, at the same time, was supposed to go to, he was traveling on the streets in Beijing, and he met one of the soldiers of the Gan army and got killed. Now, there are two sides of the story. One side is that Kettler, this is the Chinese side, shot first, and then in response to that, the Chinese killed him. On the German side is Kettler got killed. But either way, what's really interesting is that 6 days prior to that, a Chinese newspaper actually talked about his death.
Okay.
So as it was predicted.
Yeah.
And so everybody would think that it was... Huh?
Nostradamus?
Yeah, but the report of my death was exaggerated, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So so the Germans then became much more so the Germans were going to fight, we're going to avenge the death of the ambassador.
Well, the U.S. was fighting a war in the Philippines as well.
At the same time, right after. Yeah. So they actually assembled an army of the few countries were assembling an army to actually save the foreign diplomats in Beijing, right? Because actually everybody actually fled the other embassies and went to the biggest embassy at the time, which was the Brits. The British embassy was by far the biggest. So all the foreign diplomats were actually in there. Okay, and on the same day, on the 21st of June, China actually declared war on all the countries. It was like the only time in human history where a country would declare war on all of you. It was literally, the ancient Chinese were like 皮党, which means all you people. And so it was like 11 countries. Let me see if I can. So Britain, France, Germany, Japan, Russia, Germany, Austria. I'll talk about Germany already. Austria, Hungary, America, Belgium, Holland, Spain, and not Portugal. Did I do Japan already? Russia? Oh gosh. Let me write it out. Italy. So 11 countries, but only 8 countries actually bothered to send an army. So the Belgium, Holland, and Spain didn't even they kind of declared war on them, and they were like, so what? We're not going to do anything. But the 8 countries sent troops, and the troops were assembled. The biggest, obviously, lion's share. This one I have too. So 8,000 Japanese soldiers, because closest 4.8 thousand Russians, 3,000 British, 2,000 Americans, 800 French, 50 Austria, and 53 Italy. So there's an 8-country alliance. So actually, but Austria and Italy, they add up to about 100. But what's interesting is that this is multiracial, because, okay, the Russians and the Japanese were actually their own nationality or race, but most of the British soldiers were actually Sikhs from India, because Britain was actually fighting a war in the Boer War at the time in South America, so they didn't have the resources to send their own soldiers. And what's really interesting is if you look closely at the pictures, there were Chinese people wearing British military uniform. They're mostly from Weihai, where C.Y. Leung is from, actually. There were actually a bunch of Chinese soldiers fighting for the British against the Chinese. Okay?
Why would that be the case?
Well, because it's like there were Hong Kong people as well. Because Weihai and Hong Kong were ruled by Britain at the time. So it's kind of like police officers, kind of like assembled to fight. And then there was, the French were mostly Vietnamese and from Morocco. So it's actually very interesting. It's a United Nations. And then they would fight. And as they were going in, actually, what's interesting is that Morse, it was like the teacher of Fairbank, said this. Fairbank is the famous Harvard Chinese history specialist. Like, the Empress Dowager had long avoided committing herself to any position from which she could not withdraw, but now the statesman was lost in the woman. Obviously, quite sexist at the time. It was like 1900. But what's interesting is that the common perception is really that the Empress Dowager was furious that the foreigners would take her position and take her power and give it back to Guangxu. And that's why she would declare war on all of them. I actually take a little bit different approach, and that is, if you understand the DNA of the power structure of Qing China, in late Qing China, and also who held the armed forces, you realize that the Empress Dowager were actually playing both sides. Because on the same day that she did that, a bunch of the Han local officials, Yuan Shikai in Shandong, the guy who actually did the experiment on the boxes, Liu Kunyi of Shanghai, Zhang Zhidong of Hubei, so like Wutang, and then like Guangzhou, Li Hongzhang, all of them assembled together and created this East-South defense alliance. It's basically saying that, you know what, that declaration of war, it's fake. The Empress Dowager would never say that. She must be kidnapped. And by the way, so we're actually not at war. So when the Brits were offered, do you need any help to maintain order inside the the Yangtze River? Liu Kunyi and Zhang Zhidong said, no thanks, wouldn't be good. So they actually signed a separate, these officials actually signed a separate treaty, an agreement with the foreign powers saying that, by the way, so for us, we are good. We're not going to let the Boxers do anything to the foreigners, and you don't have to invade us. So it's a very interesting thing about it, as if like Washington would fight a war, but then like California would say like, I don't think so, not us. So basically that's what happened. And eventually there are 18 at the time there were 18 provinces within the main Han. 13 of the provinces joined this East-South alliance. So basically most of the provinces did not participate. Only Shanxi and Hebei, like Beijing, actually participated. So basically, the whole country was breaking down. But as they were doing so the Empress Dowager asked Li Hongzhang to come in mid-June. Li Hongzhang didn't come. As they were doing this East-South thing, Empress Dowager actually commended them for doing this. It's a smart thing to do. It's very, very weird. Like, so one side she's supporting Duan and Dong and the Boxers. The other side is like, you know, what you just did is it's good stuff. So she's playing both sides. And obviously the Boxers would continue burning and killing and whatever. They actually tried to burn down this pharmacy. And then actually everybody was out, kind of like Occupy Central. Everybody else was like, please don't burn down anything. And it's like, and the Boxers like, don't worry. If you are true in your heart that you're true Chinese and you're against foreigners, the fire wouldn't get to you. And so obviously as they burned, the whole of the business district was gone in Beijing. And so late June, they're attacking the embassies, attacking. And so, as I said, the Gan army was actually pretty crappy. There are like 20,000 people try to fight, to occupy one of the French Catholic cathedral, and there were only like 50 soldiers with guns like fighting against them, and they couldn't take down the even a church. So because you can think of the level of artillery, how far it went, and then obviously the Gan and the Boxers were like, you know what? The reason is because they splashed women's ovulating blood, like period blood all over. That's why it's hurting our qi. Yeah, and there are naked women walking around, and that really so like the naked woman and whatever, as far as like local Chinese folklore is concerned, is something that breaks the god's power.